Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block: politics, perspectives, and players. The Rohingya people have suffered horrific atrocities that dominated the headlines as the victims of what the UN has called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Despite the mass killing, persecution, and rape and abuse of Rohingya women and girls, advocates here in Canada say the Canadian government has done little to help the Rohingya, giving the Trudeau Liberals a C grade in a year-end report. The Rohingya have been suffering for over a year. In August of 2017, the Myanmar government launched a brutal campaign against the Rohingya people, wiping out their villages in retaliation for attacks on police and army posts by a militant group in that country. Since then, thousands of Rohingyas have been killed and over 1 million more have fled the country as refugees, living in dire conditions in Bangladesh. Advocates have called on the Canadian government to invoke the UN Genocide Convention and to do more to help this ethnic Muslim minority. Joining me now is Fareed Khan, spokesperson for the Rohingya Human Rights Network. Now, you gave the Trudeau government a C for their status on this file. What do you think that the biggest failure of the Liberal government has been on this?
Well, we gave them an overall C. There was one A, which we gave which we gave Canada, and that was in the area of parliamentary action with respect to the resolutions that were unanimously passed with government support in both the House of Commons and the Senate. The failure was with respect to invoking the UN Genocide Convention. We've been calling on that for a year. We believe it is Canada's moral and legal responsibility under the UN Genocide Convention to invoke the terms of that convention in what the UN has actually called a genocide.
Why do you think the Canadian government has been stalling on that?
I would love to know. We have been having meetings with MPs, and we don't have any indication as to why the government is hesitating. The only thing that I can speculate on is that they're waiting for some other nation to take the lead on this, which I think is an abrogation of their responsibility under the UN Genocide Convention.
Have they given you any indication at the government level that they're committed to doing this?
No, there has been no indication from the discussion and meetings that we have had. They've been willing to listen to us, which we're thankful for the meetings that we've had with government officials. But with respect to invoking the convention, there's been no indication at this point that the government is heading in that direction.
What do you think is holding the international community back? Because it's not just Canada. We've heard condemnation from around the world, but there's really been very little in terms of actual action. Why not?
You know what? The world seems to be a more chaotic place now. We're looking at different places in the world where violence is happening. We've got what's happening to the Rohingya in Myanmar. We've got what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, what's happening in Yemen. And it seems that the world's attention is distracted with so many different issues, as well as what's happening internally in nations in Europe, as well as the United States. You have to have a leadership that is committed to a moral course of action in order to do the things that need to be done to save people. And for some reason, the world community is not there, and it's really, really disappointing.
What is the consequence of that for the Rohingya people?
Well, the consequences of that right now is that there continues to be an ongoing genocide in Myanmar. There's 130,000 Rohingya basically living in concentration camp conditions, and there's another 200,000 that live in fear throughout the country. People continue to trickle out. The news that comes out is that the oppression continues. And the Myanmar government, because it sees the world basically sitting by and not taking any concrete action, is free now to turn their attention to other ethnic minorities. They have now turned their attention to the Shan, the Kachin minorities, Christian minorities in Myanmar.
The Canadian government says, look, we've committed $300 million to trying to sort out this crisis. I know you have criticized that commitment. Why?
Well, we're thankful for the $300 million. That's a significant amount of money, but we were hoping that they would commit to the amount that Bob Rae recommended in his report, which was $600 million over 4 years, as opposed to $300 million over 3 years. And the money that was committed was, the vast majority of that money is going for humanitarian aid programs in the camps in Bangladesh. And That is fine and well, because those issues do need to be addressed, the humanitarian issues, but the very source of this is a genocide agenda that's been going on for decades in Myanmar by the Myanmar government, and that is what needs to be addressed if ultimately the problem is to be solved.
What do you think it's going to take to have that addressed with the Myanmar government, to confront them and say, this, not just say this is unacceptable, but send that message in a way that actually causes them to cease their actions?
Well, I think that a good first step would be for Canada to invoke the UN Genocide Convention. It doesn't need agreement from other nations to do that. As a state party to the convention, Canada can go ahead and invoke the terms and then leave it up to the International Court of Justice to then do take the actions necessary to hold the state of Myanmar accountable, as well as individuals accountable. That would be a first step. And then continue to work in international forums, as the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister have done, to bring this up. They raised it at the G7 meeting this year. They raised it at APEC. So this needs to be something that Canada can lead on, but it needs to bring along its allies, not just European allies, but allies in the Far East like Japan and Australia, to pressure Myanmar to basically live up to the rule of law. Is
there hope that the Rohingya will be able to return home?
There's always hope, because if there wasn't hope, then we wouldn't be moving forward as we are. The Rohingya need to have hope, and we are trying to give them that hope by doing the work that we're doing in Canada, as well as Rohingya activists in other parts of the world are doing. Unfortunately, the process takes far longer than we would like it to, and that is the issue that we're contending with. It took a year for the Canadian government to take two symbolic actions, for Canada to take two symbolic actions by passing those motions in the House and the Senate to recognize the genocide and revoke Aung San Suu Kyi's honorary Canadian citizenship, even though there was evidence, ample evidence available about what was happening. We hope it doesn't take another year for the government to come to the decision that the Genocide Convention needs to be invoked if we are to live up to our ideals as what we see ourselves as a nation that lives up to the rule of law and defends human rights.
Before we go, because I think for a lot of people at home, we remember seeing the headlines about what was happening to Rohingya, but you don't see a lot of news now. Mm-hmm. What's the current state in terms of both the refugees who have had to flee and what Rohingya may be remaining behind in Myanmar?
Well, within the refugee camps, there's fear about forced repatriation. There's fear about the Bangladesh government moving 100,000 of the refugees to an island site in the middle of the Bay of Bengal. Within Myanmar itself, the fear is even greater because they continue to be persecuted. The government continues its policies of genocide against the remaining Rohingya. And we have to decide what do we want to be as a nation. Do we want to live up to our ideals? Do we want to live up to that reputation that we have internationally as a nation that not only speaks out about human rights, but takes action when and where necessary?
Mr. Khan, thank you for joining us on this very important issue. We deeply appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I'm Mercedes Stevenson for the West Block. We'll see you right back here next week.